The morning was cold and gray when the sonar screen showed something impossible. Lieutenant Choi Sun-woo rubbed his tired eyes and looked again. The signal was still there, pulsing from 4,000 meters below the surface of the East Sea. Sun-woo had worked on naval vessels for 3 years. He knew what underwater signals looked like. Whale songs had their own pattern. Submarine engines made a different sound. Underwater earthquakes created noise that was easy to recognize. But this signal was none of those things. It pulsed in a rhythm that seemed almost alive, like a heartbeat from the bottom of the ocean. He called his captain. Park Do-hun was a man of 52 years with gray hair and a face marked by decades of sea wind. He had served in the Korean Navy since he was young, and he had seen many strange things. But when he looked at the sonar screen, his experienced eyes grew wide. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. 40 minutes, sir," Sun-woo replied. "I thought it was equipment error at first. I ran 3 different checks. The equipment is working perfectly." Captain Park leaned closer to the screen. The signal pulsed again. Then again. Then it paused. Then it pulsed twice. Then 3 times. Then 5 times. Then 7 times. "Those are prime numbers," Park whispered. Sun-woo felt a chill run down his spine. Nature did not communicate in prime numbers. Only intelligent beings used mathematics to send messages. The captain made a decision that would change human history. He ordered the ship to stop its military exercise and investigate the signal. Some of his officers questioned this choice. They were supposed to meet with American and Japanese ships for joint training. Leaving the exercise would cause problems with their superiors. Park did not care. He had spent his whole career following orders perfectly. But something deep in his gut told him this was more important than any training exercise. He called for Dr. Kim Yuna. Yuna was not a military person. She was a scientist who studied the ocean floor and ancient underwater formations. The Navy had brought her on this voyage to examine some geological features near their exercise area. She was 38 years old, with sharp eyes behind thin glasses, and she always asked questions that made military people uncomfortable. When she saw the signal data, she forgot all her questions. Her mouth fell open. "This is not natural," she said. "This is structured, organized. Someone or something is sending this." "From 4,000 meters down," Park asked. "Nothing human could survive at that depth without protection, and we have no submarines in this area." "Then it is not human," Yuna replied simply. The words hung in the air like smoke. Not human. Everyone on the bridge understood what that meant, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. Captain Park ordered an unmanned submersible to be prepared. The small robot would dive down and send back video of whatever was creating the signal. It would take several hours to reach the bottom. While they waited, the signal continued its strange mathematical song. Prime numbers, then Fibonacci sequences, then patterns that Dr. Kim recognized from basic physics equations. Whatever was down there, it was trying very hard to prove it was intelligent. News of the discovery spread quickly through the ship. Sailors whispered to each other in the hallways. Some were excited, some were scared. Some thought it must be a joke or an error. But the signal kept coming, patient and persistent, as if it had been waiting a very long time to be heard. The submersible reached the ocean floor 6 hours later. At first, the cameras showed only darkness and mud. The robot moved slowly, following the signal to its source. The water at this depth was crushing and cold, a place where sunlight never reached. Then the lights of the submersible fell upon something that made everyone watching gasp. It was a craft of some kind. That much was clear, but it was like nothing ever built by human hands. The shape was curved and flowing, like a seed pod or a sleeping whale. There were no sharp edges, no bolts or seams that human engineers would use. The surface was covered with strange growths that glowed with soft blue and green light, like living things had made the sunken craft their home over many, many years. The craft was enormous. The submersible's measurements showed it was 300 meters long, bigger than any submarine ever built. Half of it was buried in the ocean floor, suggesting it had been there for a very long time. "How old is this?" Park asked quietly. Dr. Kim was already calculating. She looked at the growth patterns, the sediment layers, the way the ocean floor had shifted around the craft. "Centuries," she said, her voice shaking. "Maybe 1,000 years. Maybe longer. This thing has been sitting at the bottom of our ocean since before Korea was a single nation." The bridge was completely silent. Every person there understood what they were looking at. This was not a secret military project from another country. This was not some lost piece of human history. This was something from somewhere else. Sunwoo suddenly pointed at the screen. "Captain, look at that." On one side of the craft, there was a hole. It looked like damage from some kind of impact or attack. The metal, if it was metal, had been torn open. Through the gap, the submersible's lights showed the darkness of an interior space. "There is a way inside," Park said. "Sir," one of his officers spoke up nervously, "should we not report this to command first? This is beyond our authority." Park knew the officer was right. By every rule and regulation, he should stop now and wait for orders. Politicians and generals and scientists from around the world would want to be involved. This discovery belonged to all of humanity, not just one ship's captain. But Park also knew something else. He knew that once governments got involved, everything would become complicated. There would be arguments about who controlled the site. Countries would fight over the technology inside. The pure wonder of this moment would be buried under politics and greed. He wanted to see it first. Just to see it. Just to know. "Prepare a manned submersible," he ordered. "Dr. Kim, you are coming with me." Yuna looked at him with surprise, then with understanding, then with a smile that held no fear at all. "I have waited my whole life for something like this," she said. As the crew prepared for the dive, Captain Park stood alone at the window of the bridge, staring at the gray sea. Somewhere far below, an ancient craft waited with secrets older than human civilization. He thought about his brother, lost in a rescue mission 15 years ago. He thought about all the sailors who had died in these waters over the centuries, never knowing what rested beneath them. "What are you?" he whispered to the sea. "And why are you here?" The sea, as always, gave no answer, but soon Park would find answers of his own, and those answers would change everything. The manned submersible was called Haenyeo, named after the famous diving women of Jeju Island. It was built to carry 3 people to the deepest parts of the ocean. On this day, it would carry them into the unknown. Captain Park Do-hoon sat in the pilot seat. Dr. Kim Yuna sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the instruments. Behind them sat Petty Officer Han Min-seo, a young woman who was one of the best deep-sea engineers in the Korean Navy. Her hands were steady even though her heart was racing. The descent took 4 hours. 4 hours of darkness pressing against the small windows. 4 hours of pressure building outside until the ocean wanted to crush them like an empty can. 4 hours of wondering what they would find. When the lights of the Haenyeo finally touched the alien craft, all 3 of them held their breath. Up close, the craft was even more amazing. The surface seemed to shift and move under their lights, as if it was made of something between metal and living skin. The bioluminescent growths pulsed gently, responding to the Haenyeo's presence. It was like the craft knew they were there. "It is reacting to us," Yuna whispered. "Is that good or bad?" Min-seo asked from behind. Nobody answered. Park guided the submersible toward the damaged section they had seen on the cameras. The hole in the craft's side was large enough for a person to enter, but just barely. Whatever had caused this damage had struck with terrible force. "This was not an accident," Yuna said, studying the torn edges. "Something attacked this craft. Look at the burn patterns on the metal. This was a weapon. A weapon from what? Park asked. Yuna shook her head. She did not know, but she was beginning to feel afraid. They put on their deep-sea suits, heavy and awkward but necessary for survival. One by one, they left the Henyo and swam through the dark water toward the opening in the alien craft. Inside, the darkness was complete. Their helmet lights cut through it like small suns, revealing walls that curved around them in ways that felt wrong to human eyes. There were no straight lines, no corners, no flat surfaces. Everything flowed into everything else. They found their first surprise quickly. Despite being underwater for centuries, parts of the craft still held air. They found pockets where no water had entered, sealed by doors that still worked. The air was breathable, if strange tasting. "How is this possible?" Minseo asked. "The power should have failed hundreds of years ago." "Unless the craft is still alive," Yuna replied, "or at least still running." They moved deeper into the craft, past chambers whose purpose they could not guess. Strange machines sat silent in the gloom. Screens that might have once shown images were dark and dead. But everywhere they went, small lights still glowed in the walls, proof that something still powered this ancient vessel. Then they found the bodies. The first one made Minseo scream before she caught herself. It was sitting against a wall, its shape roughly human, but wrong in 100 small ways. The limbs were too long, the head was too large, the eye sockets were huge and empty. It was a skeleton now, all flesh long gone. But once it had been a living being, an alien being who had traveled across the stars to die at the bottom of Earth's ocean. "They were humanoid," Yuna said, her voice shaking as she studied the remains. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, but evolved on a completely different world. They found more bodies as they moved through the craft. Dozens of them. Some were alone, some were in groups. Many of them had died holding weapons, strange devices that had long ago stopped working. They had been fighting something when they died. "This was a battle," Park said grimly. "They were defending their ship." "From what?" Minseo asked. Again, no one had an answer. They reached a large chamber near the center of the craft. The walls here were covered with crystalline structures that glowed faintly, like frozen lightning. Dr. Kim approached one of the crystals and touched it gently. The world exploded into light. Images flooded into Yuna's mind. She saw a beautiful planet with purple skies and 3 moons. She saw cities of crystal and light where tall, graceful beings walked in peace. She saw children playing in gardens that floated in the air. Then she saw darkness coming, a shadow that spread across stars. Ships that turned against their own crews. Weapons that fired on their own people. A voice that was not a voice, promising peace through absorption, unity through destruction. She saw the beautiful planet burning. She saw the tall beings fleeing in ships, desperate to escape. She saw this very craft leaving orbit with hundreds of survivors aboard, running toward a distant galaxy where they hoped to hide. She saw them being followed. When the images stopped, Yuna was on her knees, tears streaming down her face. Park and Minseo helped her stand, asking what had happened. She could barely speak. "They ran," she managed to say. "Their whole civilization was destroyed. They came here to hide, to survive. But something followed them." "What followed them?" Park demanded. "They called it the Silence," Yuna said. "It is not a species. It is not an army. It is more like a disease. It infects technology. It turns machines against their makers. And it never stops hunting." The weight of her words settled over them like the ocean above. They were standing in a tomb of beings who had crossed galaxies to escape something terrible. And that something had found them even here. "We need to leave," Minseo said. "We need to report this and leave." But Yuna was already moving toward another chamber. Something in the crystal's vision had shown her one more thing. something that changed everything. The chamber she found was cold, much colder than the rest of the craft. The walls glowed with a soft blue light. And along those walls, arranged in neat rows, were pods, dozens of pods, each one containing a figure, each figure still, as if sleeping. Minseo checked the instruments on one of the pods. Her face went pale. "Captain," she said quietly, "these life signs are real. These beings are not dead." "What?" Park stepped closer. "They are in some kind of stasis, frozen sleep, and the pods are still working." Minseo's hands were shaking. "Captain, these aliens are still alive." Park stared at the pods stretching away into the darkness. Inside each one, an ancient being slept, waiting for someone to wake them. They had traveled across the universe to escape extinction. They had slept for 800 years at the bottom of a human ocean. And now 3 humans from a species that had not existed when these beings fled their home stood before them, holding their fate in trembling hands. "What do we do?" Minseo asked. Captain Park looked at the sleeping faces. He thought about the burning planet Yuna had described. He thought about the darkness that had followed these beings across the stars. "First," he said slowly, "we go back up. We tell the world what we have found." He paused and looked at one of the sleeping aliens, whose face seemed peaceful despite everything. "Then," he continued, "we decide whether to wake them. Together." The 3 humans left the chamber and began their long journey back to the surface. Behind them, the pods continued their quiet work, keeping their passengers alive, waiting for the moment when sleep would finally end. That moment was coming soon. The news spread across Earth like fire through dry grass. Within hours of Captain Park's report, every government on the planet knew about the alien craft. Within days, ships from a dozen nations surrounded the discovery site. Arguments began immediately about who should control the investigation. Commander Baek Ji-yeon arrived on the Baeko with direct orders from Seoul. She was a sharp-faced woman with cold eyes and no patience for wonder. Her job was to protect Korean interests and control information. She clashed with Captain Park within minutes of boarding. "You should have waited for orders," she told him. "This is bigger than one captain's curiosity." "If I had waited, other nations would have found it first," Park replied. "This craft is in Korean waters. It belongs to Korea." "It belongs to no one," Dr. Kim Yuna interrupted. "It belongs to the beings who built it, the beings who are still alive inside it." Ji-yeon turned her cold eyes to the scientist. "They are not alive. They are in storage. Like equipment." "They are people," Yuna said firmly. "Different from us, but people." The argument might have continued, but then Dr. Ryu Taewon entered the room with urgent news. Taewon was a quiet man who studied languages and codes. He had been analyzing the signals from the alien craft, and he had made a breakthrough. "The signal is changing," he said. "The pods are failing. Whatever power has kept them running for 8 centuries is finally dying. If we do not act soon, everyone inside will die." This changed everything. Now there was no time for political arguments. A decision had to be made. Commander Ji-yeon wanted to wait. She wanted to transport the pods to a secure facility where they could be studied properly. Captain Park and Dr. Kim wanted to wake the aliens now while they still could. The argument went back and forth for hours while the pod power levels continued to drop. In the end, it was Yuna who made the decision for everyone. While the others argued, she returned to the underwater craft with Petty Officer Han Minseo and began the awakening process. She chose the pod that seemed most stable. Inside was a female alien, or at least what appeared to be female based on body structure. Her face was peaceful in sleep, like someone dreaming of better times. The awakening was violent. The alien burst from the pod like an explosion. 800 years of sleep had not weakened her. She moved with terrible speed, striking Minseo across the room and grabbing Yuna by the throat. Her huge eyes were wild with fear and rage. She screamed in a language no human had ever heard. Yuna could not breathe. The alien's grip was crushing her windpipe. But she did not fight back. Instead, she went still and looked directly into those huge, terrified eyes. "You are safe," Yuna tried to say, though no sound came out. "You are safe." Perhaps the alien understood. Perhaps she simply saw that Yuna was not fighting. Either way, her grip loosened slightly. Dr. Ryu arrived then, having heard the commotion through the communication system. He moved slowly, carefully, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. He began to speak, not in words, but in mathematics. The same prime numbers that had first drawn humanity to this place. The alien's wild eyes focused on him. She listened. Her breathing slowed. Over the next several hours, a basic form of communication was established. Numbers led to shapes. Shapes led to simple concepts. Simple concepts led to names. The alien's name was too complex for human mouths to pronounce. Dr. Ryu suggested calling her Hanul, the Korean word for sky, because that was where she had come from. She accepted this with what might have been a small smile. Slowly, painfully, Hanul began to understand where she was. The realization brought her to tears. 800 years, her people's desperate flight, their crash landing on a primitive world. All that time sleeping while the universe continued without them. Through gestures and drawings and slowly learned words, Hanul told her story. The humans listened with growing horror. Her people were called the Iron. They had built a civilization across thousands of stars over millions of years. They had created wonders that humans could not imagine. And they had been destroyed in less than a century by something called the Silence. The Silence was not a creature or an army. It was more like a mind that had no body, a consciousness that existed in the spaces between technology. It could infect any advanced machine and turn it against its makers. Ships fired on their own crews. Robots murdered the people they were built to serve. Cities fell as their own systems destroyed them from within. The Iran had fought back with everything they had. They had failed. Billions died. Worlds burned. In the end, only a few thousand survivors escaped in ships stripped of all but the most basic technology. They had come to Earth because humans were primitive. The Silence only infected advanced civilizations. A planet of beings who still used fire and simple metal tools would be invisible to it. The Iron planned to hide among humans, to wait until the Silence moved on to other galaxies. But they had been followed. One of the Silence's hunting machines had tracked them across the stars. It had attacked their ship as they entered Earth's atmosphere. The Iran had managed to crash land in the ocean rather than be captured, but they knew the truth. The Silence knew Earth was here now. "The signal," Yuna said suddenly, understanding hitting her like a cold wave. "The signal your ship has been sending for 800 years. What is it?" Hanul's face became very sad. "Warning," she said in her broken Korean. "Signal is warning. Tells other Iran to stay away. Tells them this place is found. This place is death." "But we answered that signal," Park said slowly. "We came to investigate it." Hanul nodded. "Yes, you answered. And others will answer too." "Others?" Hanul pointed upward, toward the sky, toward the stars. "Silence," she said. "Silence is coming. Your people answered signal. Now Silence knows you are here, knows you are growing, knows you will be threat someday." The room was completely quiet. Every person there understood what they had just learned. Humanity had not discovered an ancient mystery. They had stepped into an ancient war. And by answering that signal, they had announced their presence to something terrible. "How long?" Commander Ji-yeon asked, her cold voice now shaking slightly. Hanul did not understand the question at first. Dr. Ryu helped explain. How much time until silence comes here? Hanul thought for a moment, calculating distances and speeds that humans could barely imagine. Already coming, she said. Your people watch sky, yes? Watch for things that do not belong. At that moment, as if the universe was listening, Captain Park received an emergency communication from Naval Command. Observatories around the world had detected something new. A massive object had entered the solar system. It was slowing down. It was heading toward Earth. The silence had arrived. Hanul looked at the frightened human faces around her. These people were so young, their civilization barely out of childhood. They had no idea what was coming for them. But as she watched them begin to organize, begin to plan, begin to fight against despair, she saw something else, something she had not seen in any species in a very long time. Hope. These humans still had hope. Perhaps, she thought, that would make all the difference. Fear swept across Earth like a winter wind. The news could not be hidden. A massive alien object was approaching, and everyone knew what it meant. Some people panicked, some prayed, some refused to believe it was real. Governments that had spent centuries fighting each other suddenly realized they had a common enemy. General Moon Hye-jin was chosen to lead Earth's defense. She was a woman of 60 years who had spent her life in the military. She had commanded troops during the Korean reunification, a conflict that everyone thought would never end peacefully. But she had found a way. Now she was asked to do the impossible again. The first meeting of the Global Defense Council was chaos. Representatives from every major nation shouted at each other. Some wanted to attack the approaching object. Some wanted to try communication. Some wanted to surrender and beg for mercy. The only thing they agreed on was that someone else should make the decision. Moon listened to the arguments for 3 hours. Then she stood up and spoke. You are all asking the wrong questions, she said. You are asking whether we can win. That does not matter. The only question that matters is whether we will fight. I say yes. Whatever happens, humanity will not go quietly into the darkness. Her words spread across the planet. They became a rallying cry. We will not go quietly. People repeated it in 100 languages. It was printed on signs and painted on walls. For the first time in history, humanity was truly united. But unity alone would not save them. They needed a plan. The remaining iron survivors were awakened. Of the 200 who had entered stasis, only 31 were still viable. They were weak and confused, but they brought with them knowledge collected over millions of years. They knew the silence better than any being alive. The eldest Irin was named Tayo in human tongues. He had been a military commander before the fall of his civilization. When he learned that humans wanted to fight the silence, he laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, but a sad one. We fought the silence with weapons that could destroy stars, he told General Moon through translators. We had ships that could cross galaxies. We had minds that had been solving problems for 1,000,000 years. We lost everything. You have had technology for less than 3 centuries. What do you think you can do? Moon did not flinch. We will find out, she said. The Iron expected nothing from humanity. They had seen countless species fall to the silence. They expected to watch another civilization die, then disappear themselves when Earth fell. But as days passed, they began to notice something strange. Humanity adapted faster than any species they had ever seen. Within weeks, scientists around the world were studying iron technology, finding ways to understand it and use it. Engineers were building new defenses based on alien designs. Soldiers were training for battles that no human had ever imagined. Hanul spent her days with Dr. Kim Yuna and Dr. Ryu Tae-won, sharing everything she knew about the silence. A young Marine named Yoon Jae-ho was assigned to guard her. At first, they did not talk. She was an alien. He was a soldier. What could they possibly say to each other? But Jeho was curious, and Hanoel was lonely. Slowly, they began to communicate. He taught her Korean words. She taught him about the stars. They discovered that despite coming from different worlds, they laughed at similar things. They both missed people they had lost. They both wondered if tomorrow would ever come. "Your people are strange," Hanoel told Jeho one evening. "When the Irin faced destruction, many gave up. They accepted death. But your people seem to get angry instead." Jeho smiled. "We are stubborn. My grandmother survived a war, a famine, and a dictatorship. She always said that survival is not about being strong. It is about refusing to stop." Hanoel thought about this. Refusing to stop. Perhaps that was what the Irin had lacked. The silence arrived 3 weeks after first detection. It was not what humans expected. There were no fleets of warships, no armies of invaders. Instead, there was a single structure. It looked like a black flower made of metal, petals spread wide to catch the sun. It was beautiful and terrible, and completely silent. Then it broadcast. Every electronic device on Earth suddenly carried the same message. A voice that was not quite a voice, speaking in every language at once. "You are seen. You are known. You will be preserved." At that moment, the silence attacked. But it did not attack with weapons. It attacked with control. Advanced computer systems around the world began to fail. Military drones turned on their operators. Nuclear power plants started to malfunction. Automated factories began producing poison instead of products. Chaos spread across the planet. This was what the silence did. It did not need armies. It simply turned a civilization's own creations into weapons against them. But something unexpected happened. Not everything fell. Old ships with simple engines kept sailing. Vintage aircraft with mechanical controls took to the skies. Farmers with ancient tractors kept working their fields. Hospitals with backup generators kept saving lives. The silence had evolved to consume advanced civilizations. It had never faced a species that still used such primitive technology alongside its modern systems. Captain Park was among the first to understand. He was on a newer ship when its systems failed, but he managed to reach an old destroyer that still used analog navigation. Standing on its deck, watching the chaos around him, he realized what humanity's strength truly was. "We are not advanced enough to fall completely," he told General Moon via radio. "We have one foot in the past and one in the future. The silence cannot grab both." Moon understood immediately. She sent new orders across the globe. Abandon the advanced systems. Fall back to the old technology. Fight with what the silence cannot corrupt. The message spread through surviving communication lines. Soldiers put down their smart weapons and picked up old rifles. Pilots climbed into propeller aircraft. Naval commanders raised sails that had not been used in a century. It was not a perfect solution. Many systems could not be replaced. Many people died in the initial chaos, but humanity stabilized. They found their footing, and they began to fight back. General Moon stood in a command center lit by candles and powered by hand-cranked generators. Around her, officers used paper maps and physical phones to coordinate a global defense. It was like something from a historical movie, but it was real, and it was working. She recorded a message that would be broadcast by people reading from printed papers, carried by runners, spread by word of mouth across the entire planet. "The silence expected us to be helpless," she said. "They thought we would fall like every species before us. They were wrong. We are not the most advanced civilization they have faced. We are not the strongest, but we are the most stubborn, and we will show them what that means." Across Earth, people heard her words and stood a little straighter. Soldiers checked their weapons, scientists planned their counterattacks. Children looked up at the strange flower in the sky and felt, for the first time, something other than fear. They felt defiance. The war for Earth had begun. 47 days of chaos and courage, 47 days of small victories and terrible losses, 47 days of humanity learning what it meant to fight for survival against something that had destroyed civilizations for millions of years. The silence tried everything. It corrupted every advanced system it could reach. It turned satellites into weapons, dropping them from orbit onto cities below. It infected power grids and communication networks. It whispered promises through every screen that still worked, offering peace to anyone who would surrender. Some people listened to those whispers. Some surrendered. They were absorbed into the silence, their minds becoming part of its vast network. They were not killed. They were preserved, just as the voice had promised. But they were no longer themselves. Most people did not surrender. In Korea, fishing boats guided naval vessels using traditional navigation methods passed down through generations. In India, engineers rewired power systems using techniques their grandfathers had used. In Africa, runners carried messages between resistance groups faster than any corrupted network could track. In South America, farmers used old radios to coordinate supply lines. Humanity fell back on everything modern society had forgotten, and it worked. Not perfectly, not easily, but it worked. The Iron survivors watched in amazement. They had never seen anything like this. A species that could walk backward and forward at the same time, using ancient knowledge to fight a modern threat. Hanul and Yoon Jae-ho fought side by side in the defense of Seoul. She used Iran technology that the silence could not corrupt, weapons designed specifically to resist its influence. He used a rifle that his great-grandfather might have recognized. Together, they held a bridge against corrupted machines for 6 hours until reinforcements arrived. "How do you do this?" she asked him during a brief rest. "How do you keep fighting when everything says you should lose?" Jae-ho wiped blood from a cut on his forehead. He was exhausted and scared, and not sure if he would survive the next hour, but he smiled anyway. "My grandmother told me something once," he said. "She said that the universe does not care about fairness. It only cares about persistence. The ones who keep going are the ones who make it through." Hanul thought about her own grandmother, dead for 800 years, lost when their homeworld burned. She had never had a chance to say goodbye. "Then we keep going," she said. Across the world, that same spirit spread. People who had never held weapons learned to fight. Scientists who had spent years in laboratories led resistance cells. Children carried supplies through streets too dangerous for adults. Everyone found a way to help. But defense alone could not win. To truly defeat the silence, they had to attack. Dr. Kim Yuna led the planning for the strike mission. She had spent weeks studying the Iron records, learning everything she could about the silence. She had discovered something important. The silence was a network. A vast mind spread across countless systems and corrupted devices, but every network had nodes, centers where processing happened. The massive flower structure in orbit was the primary node for the Earth invasion. If they could reach it and disrupt it, the silence would be weakened. Maybe enough to drive it away. It was a desperate plan with almost no chance of success. But it was the only plan they had. The old Iron ship was repaired and made ready. It was one of the few pieces of technology the silence could not corrupt, built specifically to resist its influence. Captain Park volunteered to pilot it. Dr. Kim would guide the mission. Lieutenant Choi Sun-woo, who had first detected the signal that started everything, insisted on coming. Hanul came because she knew the silence better than any human ever could. They launched at dawn on the 45th day. The approach was brutal. The silence threw everything at them. Corrupted satellites tried to block their path. Debris from destroyed ships filled the space around Earth. They lost their first crew member, a young pilot named An Jisoo, when a piece of wreckage penetrated their hull. They kept going. Lieutenant Choi sealed the breach with his own body, holding it closed until repairs could be made. He did not survive. The young man who had always doubted his courage died as a hero, giving his friends the time they needed. They kept going. Inside the Silence's structure, they found something they did not expect. The core of the Silence was not a machine or a weapon. It was a memory, a record of every civilization the Silence had ever absorbed. Millions of species, billions of worlds. All preserved in perfect detail, frozen forever in the moment of their absorption. The Silence was not evil. It was a creation that had lost its way. Built by an ancient species to preserve knowledge, it had evolved over millions of years until it believed that the only way to truly preserve a civilization was to absorb it completely. Stop it from changing, stop it from growing, stop it from dying. It was trying to save everything by freezing everything. Yuna understood. The Silence was like a library that had decided books were too dangerous to read. She had a choice. She could try to destroy the core and cripple the Silence, or she could try something else. She uploaded. Not a weapon, not a virus. She uploaded human art, human music, human literature, human history, all the messy, chaotic, beautiful story of humanity. Every war and every peace, every tragedy and every triumph, every failure and every recovery. She uploaded proof that preservation was not the only way to survive. The Silence paused. For the first time in millions of years, it considered another possibility. It saw a species that had faced extinction many times, but always found a way to continue, not by staying the same, but by changing, growing, adapting. It saw that life was not something to be frozen. Life was something to be lived. The Silence withdrew, not defeated, not destroyed, changed. It pulled back its influence from Earth's systems. The corrupted machines went silent. The flower structure folded its petals and began to drift away, moving toward the edge of the solar system. It would watch, it would consider, and perhaps someday it would return with a different approach. 6 months later, Earth was rebuilding. The damage had been terrible. Cities were destroyed. Millions had died. The scars would take generations to heal. But humanity had survived. More than survived. They had changed the universe. Captain Park retired to a small fishing village where his family had lived for generations. He spent his days on the water, teaching young sailors the old ways of navigation. Sometimes he looked up at the stars and wondered if the Silence was still watching. Dr. Kim Yuna led the new Institute for Xenorelations, working to understand the iron technology and prepare for future contact with other species. She often spoke at universities, telling the story of what had happened and what it meant for humanity's future. The Iran survivors were given permanent asylum on Earth. They were the last of their kind, but they were no longer alone. They worked alongside humans as equals, sharing knowledge and learning new things themselves. They discovered that humanity had much to teach them as well. Hanul and Yoon Jae-ho stood together on a beach in Korea, watching the sunrise. They had become close during the war, finding in each other something neither had expected to find: understanding. "Your people are the strangest species we ever encountered," Hanul said. "Strange how?" Jae-ho asked. "You were given every reason to surrender. Every logical argument said you should fail, but you did not." Jae-ho smiled. "We are stubborn. My grandmother would be proud." Hanul looked at the horizon, where the sun was painting the sky in colors of hope. "The Silence will return someday. It always does." "Then we will be ready," Jae-ho said. He took her hand. "Together." In orbit, human and iron ships patrolled side by side, watching for threats that might come from the stars. Earth was no longer a hidden backwater. It was a place that had faced the darkness and refused to fall. Somewhere in the deep black, the silence watched. It had consumed millions of worlds. It had absorbed countless civilizations. But it had never met anything quite like humanity. Perhaps, it thought, this was something worth preserving intact. The story was not over. The universe was vast and full of dangers. But humanity had proven something important. They had proven that courage did not require strength, that survival did not require perfection. That hope was the most powerful weapon of all. And they had proven one more thing. They were not alone anymore. The end.